And as, unsensitive as that sounds when we're talking about feelings and emotions, I think we need to apply a little bit of brute force to the incentive we have to speak up. Because no matter what, and one does sting, admittedly, you either get what you want or you get what you need.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Thrive State Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. V, triple board certified MD and performance longevity expert. And on today's podcast, I give you a very special treat. I'm actually going to share an excerpt of something I've been working on for the past year. It has been a passion project, a project of love called the Thrive State Summit. It's going to be an online and virtually event where I host 50 of the world's thought leaders and experts in the field of mental health, of how to actually get the tools to beat chronic stress and burnout. Really, it's going to be a resource that's going to be so valuable for you. You can register for free at thrivestatesummit.com. Now, if you are new to the podcast, I want to welcome you in. This podcast is really about elevating our life. And so I get the opportunity to bring in many of my friends who are thought leaders and world experts in the fields of mental health, resilience, longevity, relationships, business, where we come up with the tools and tactics for you to take your life to the next level. And for those who this podcast has already helped, if you are returning, thank you so much for allowing this podcast to grow. It is through your engagement, through you guys subscribing that really helps us. So if you haven't already, please hit subscribe. Please share this podcast with your friends and family members. And whenever you get a chance, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, consider picking up a copy of my book, Thrive State, at thrivestatebook.com. It's really the pillars, the blueprint that you need to actually control your energetic state, because it is our energetic state, the frequency by which we live life through, actually becomes a signal to our DNA that actually controls our physiology, that gives us access to optimal health, longevity, and peak performance. Now, as I said before, this is an excerpt from the Thrive State Summit. It is certainly a passion project. I spent the past year interviewing 50 of the world's top leaders in mental health, emotional wellness, to really give you the tools. And on today's podcast, we'll just give you a small sample of one interview. And so if you want to listen to the entire interview, along with the entire interviews of 50 of the world expert in mental health, chronic stress, and burnout, please register now at thrivestatesummit.com. You'll particularly want to listen and register for the summit if you are feeling the weight of chronic stress or burnout, or maybe you're grappling with persistent symptoms of anxiety or depression, or maybe even physical symptoms of fatigue, brain fog, weight gain. They're all energetically connected. If we're not looking out for our mental health, our social health, our emotional health, our spiritual health, and physical health go out the window as well. So the Thrive State Summit is something that's so near and dear to my heart. I did it because I've had so many friends in the past couple of years really suffer from the consequences of not looking after our mental health, all the way down to suicide. And so I wanted to make sure that the world has resources when dealing with mental health issues, because not only can we avoid physical, emotional, mental symptoms, but we can also end up being the very best versions of ourselves. Because trust me, the ones that love you, your family, your businesses, everyone around you is just that much better when you can bring the full you to them. So I hope you enjoy this conversation, which is the excerpt. And please register at thrivestatesummit.com. It is completely free. You're going to get so much value from it. But please enjoy this little excerpt from the Thrive State Summit. I hope to see you in the summit itself. Please enjoy this episode of the Thrive State Podcast. Hello and welcome back to another session of the Thrive State Summit. I'm here with Kien, who is a Miami-based writer, podcaster, recording artist behind the New Mindset Journal. Case actually refers to himself as the dude bro guy because he says it isn't more enlightened than the average person. But what he does have is a hunger and drive to become the best person he can be. And it was that drive and passion for growth that inspired him to start the New Mindset, Who It Is podcast in the summer of 2018. Almost 2 years later, 8 million downloads and honors as an Apple Podcast Top 30 podcast, Top 100 Mental Health, iHeartRadio Top 10, Deezer's Editorial Choice, and many more accolades. Case has made a name for himself as a prominent producer and mindfulness thought leader, which is why he's here with us today. So Case's passion and growth for introspection grew in 2020 with the release of his music and mindfulness DJ collaborations. With the success of his podcast and writing, Case has taken everything he learned about podcasting to be more driven, compassionate, and happy to create a different kind of journal. We'll talk about that journal today. This journal is a reflection of his belief that to be happy and fulfilled in one life, one shouldn't have to strive to be perfect. Rather, they should strive to be whole. Case Kenny, welcome to the summit.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction there. Very thorough, so I appreciate it.
Well, I'm excited to get into this. We met at a mental health event, actually, in Los Angeles. We know that you're in the mental health space. What was it that was going on in your life at that time that, started, to inspire you to do this podcast back in 2018?
Yeah, so it's pretty simple. So I'm 35 now. So in 2018, I was, but turning 30, somewhere around there. And at the time, I was, many years into my career. I was running a sales team in advertising technology in Chicago. So I was traveling a lot. Also at the time, I had just gotten out of a relationship. So I kind of just took a look at my life and, being a very type A person, I'm very stubborn, I'm very impatient, I'm very type A. I was like, man, it would be really unfortunate if I were to look back in 10, 20 years and realize that I worked a job that I didn't actually want, or I borrowed goals that weren't actually mine, or I dated people that looked good on paper, but not what I actually wanted in friends, partners, business colleagues, so on and so forth. So I just kind of had this, come to Jesus moment with myself where I was like, I don't want to have these regrets. Very motivated by the idea of regret. And honestly, my answer to that was, why I need to come up with these answers. So I started the podcast as a very meta way to, ask myself deep questions that I think a lot of men tend to avoid. Why do I feel the way I feel? What are my goals? Everything, every deep, sensitive, vulnerable questions. And I started the podcast to do that. That was literally a very self-serving, compassionate, but self-serving endeavor. And what I realized rather quickly through the podcast, which randomly just started to do really well, the timing of it, and that's a whole other story. But really what I realized through the process of sitting down twice a week and asking myself these questions that I wanted to answer, but hadn't taken time to even try to in the past, was I was practicing mindfulness. I was practicing something that I thought was for other people. Mindfulness is for people who go to silent retreats and have healing crystals and use the word frequencies and energies, right? I was like, it's for them. What I realized that mindfulness is for everyone, and mindfulness is the most practical thing in the world, and it's just the art of practicing self-awareness followed by action. So it became very rewarding in that sense, and then it became a career a couple of years later, just through the practice of it. So it came from a very organic place, just wanting to be someone who was more in touch with myself and didn't want to look back in life and regret not being in touch with myself. So fast forward 5 years, here we are doing the same thing. 500 episodes into the podcast, written many books, done a lot of cool things, but it's still just a passion for mindfulness.
Oh, beautiful. I can't wait to get into some of those tools that you've probably learned throughout the years. But initially, when you started your podcast, what was the initial thing? I mean, because I want to give people tools as what maybe mindfulness, how it starts with for them. Because you weren't somebody that's like, hey, you know what? I'm going to sit down for the first time for an hour and practice meditation.
Yeah.
It was a discovery process, but in what you were doing, you were discovering, man, I'm noticing my thoughts now. I'm noticing what's going on, and I can do something different about it, potentially, break some old habits. So what was it like for you when you started the podcast? How did you start it? What were the things you were doing? And by virtue of what you were doing, you were actually doing mindfulness.
I mean, it was literally asking myself questions. That is mindfulness. I mean, I think we'd all agree that one of the purposes of life, amidst maybe top big three, the purpose of life is to go out and find answers, right? You're a small child, you grow into an adult, you got a big world, you got people, relationships, purpose. You got to go out and find answers that are true for you. And we kind of forget that to find answers, we have to ask ourselves questions. And mindfulness is in my world, there's different, definitions of mindfulness. But for me, mindfulness is the art of asking yourself really tough, vulnerable, compassionate questions. That's all it is. It's sitting in the space of those questions where you don't have an answer, or maybe you have an answer that if you give that answer, it'll make you uncomfortable or make you feel like you're a loser or you're falling behind. That is what it always was and always has been and always will be. It's just the art of asking myself these questions that I think previously were on my heart, as many people feel them, but, swept them under the rug. So it was literally question and answer with myself and doing it as often as I needed to until, I was like, because it's one thing to give an answer that sounds good. It's easy to be like, blah, blah, blah. It's another thing to give a vulnerable, real answer. And that is where mindfulness starts to get really powerful, because then you start, leaning into unbecoming who you're not, unearthing maybe past reasons of why you are the way you are. And then you start getting into like the therapy side, but really it starts with questions.
And what were those initial questions you asked for yourself? Some people might be like, okay, well, what should I start asking myself? I mean, potentially people who have not been very introspective in the past before. What did some of those initial questions look like for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, the couple categories. The first category would be in moments, for instance, where I feel anxious or overwhelmed or jealous or frustrated, negative adjectives. Why? Why do I feel this way? That's the most basic. That's a real-time mindfulness, right?
Yeah.
It's like all the time, like we just act and react out of anger or jealousy or these negative words, and we don't take time to introspect. So why is the simplest form of mindfulness. Yeah. And then from there, it's more introspective, like, who am I as a person? One of my favorite journal prompts is the prompt of, I'm the kind of person who, and then you complete that with verbs, not adjectives, because it's easy to say like, confident or successful or kind or compassionate, but what are the things that you do? What are the things that you want to do that would make you feel a certain way? So that's a big one that I always lean on from a mindfulness perspective. So I'm the kind of person who, and then you complete that with verbs instead of adjectives, and you see what you come up with, and that'll either give you direction or it'll give you credit for yourself and really kind of inspire you to do more. But yeah, I'd say there's really just like real-time mindfulness, and then there's like sit in a room until you really get to the bottom of who you are, why you're feeling the way you're feeling, or like what direction you want to head.
Oh, amazing. So it seems like questions really kind of drive, a deeper understanding for yourself. So let me ask you, is that kind of what then drives the self-care practices thereafter? Is it something you discover within yourself and say, oh, I'm jealous, and then you uncover, I'm jealous because maybe there's, some feeling of unworthiness in me, and then it drives more practice? Where did the practices start coming in for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. It's the connective tissue, right? So like, it's easy to sit down and say like, I should have a self-care practice. That sounds good, and maybe you will have one. But the key to a self-care practice, a wellness practice, growing yourself, whatever it is, like you have to find incentive to do that. Yeah. And not just incentive when you're hurting and you it's very clear you need to change, but long-term sustainable incentive. And the way to do that is to connect mindfulness with the action. To say, like, for instance, if like your self-care is coming up with better boundaries for yourself because you find yourself being hurt by other people or taken advantage of by other people, it's easy to sit there and say, oh, I should have good boundaries. I should. It's another thing to say, I should have good boundaries because XYZ, here's my why, here's my past experiences where I didn't, and I'm connecting those. Now I have this incentive here. So I think a lot of the, I talk about mindfulness a lot, and mindfulness on its own, self-awareness on its own is great. It's fantastic. But if it's not connected with action, I don't want to say pointless, of course. It's always helpful. But what are we doing here with just awareness? We have to connect it with action, and that action should be incentivized by likely, and unfortunately, a past experience where you didn't act in respect to yourself. So I think that's why when I talk about mindfulness to me really is connecting past, present, and future. And it's really the mindfulness that I gravitate towards is more logical than it is spiritual. There's lots of people who practice a very spiritual form of mindfulness, which I love. That's great for them. Those are the people who are talking about vibrations and, manifestation and these words that kind of lose a lot of meaning. For me, mindfulness it's almost like you're a lawyer. You're saying, here are the facts. Here's what I've been through. I've experienced A, therefore I deserve B. I've experienced C, therefore I deserve D, and so on and so forth. And connecting your memories and your experiences with compassionate truths, and then connecting that to action To me, that is how you make a wellness routine or self-care routine real.
I hope you're enjoying the podcast thus far. Now, I wanted to give you a really neat resource that I've been working on for the past year. Are you living with chronic stress, burnout, or the nagging symptoms of anxiety and depression? Do you find yourself battling fatigue or brain fog or feeling like you're not performing at your best? Well, what I've been working on all of this year is made especially for you. It is an online virtual event called the Thrive State Summit. You can register now for free at thrivestatesummit.com. But what it is this. You get to connect with and learn from 50 world-renowned thought leaders, experts, and some of your favorite celebrities. We've got people like Bruce Lipton, Vishen Lakhiani, Dave Asprey, Dr. Josh Axe, all united with a shared mission to tackle the mental health crisis that is impacting each and every one of us. Now, the Thrive State Summit isn't just another event. It is really my hope that it becomes a catalyst for change, particularly in this fast-paced world. And so what can you expect? You're going to expect to take home life-changing takeaways from all our experts, activation sessions to be able to bring you into states of calm and relaxation, really all the resources for you to become the best version of yourself. And finally, proceeds from the Thrive State Summit will go to 4 mental health nonprofits improving Rare Impact Fund, the Trevor Project, Good Days, Genius Recoveries. So please, if you invest in yourself, and please share this resource with your friends and family members. It's something I poured my entire heart into this past year, and I know it's going to help so many people. So register now at thrivestatesummit.com.
Because it's coming from a place of genuine experience that's then being connected with introspection and why, and you're leading yourself to a place where you're incentivized to do these things rather than just say, oh, that sounds good, or yeah, I should do this. It's like, no, here's why. So I go on and on about
this is great because I think
the three.
This is the first time it was just described so eloquently, but yet so simple. Because if you start with the questions first and you understand yourself, the things that you're doing is in relation to this thing that's coming up in you. Whereas I feel people get stressed out all the time. They're like, you know what, this is going to handle some stress. They don't actually go back and link it up to the root that's within them. I'm pretty sure it helps them in a general sense, but if you've got specific triggers within you or certain things that come up within you and you understand these things, you could really start to address each one of those things very specifically and surgically. So let's talk about some action. How did you discover some, and what seems to be some that, work best for you and you've seen with other people that follow you on your podcast?
Yeah, I mean, I think the simplest form of action and mindfulness that we could do is journaling. Clearly, I'm biased, both from a business perspective and authorship perspective, but also just in general. I think, for a lot of men, like I try to approach things through the lens of men. Like men oftentimes are just less willing to take big steps in their life, whether in conversation with friends or themselves or in therapy. I think journaling is a very private and personal self-care routine that can lead you to make really compassionate changes for yourself. Journaling is so simple. I think it's one of the most powerful things you could have, both from some of the science between mind and body and actually sitting down and facing a question and making a feeling real with writing, but also because I think I talk a lot about journaling. It's like journaling is very powerful in the moment, of course, right? I hope you sit down and you journal and you're like, wow, I didn't realize I felt that way. But it's also about what you take away from journaling. I call it, which is a lame name, but I call it a journaler's mentality, which is just a lifelong mentality of mindfulness, of leaning into how you feel and making it real, not just in your head, not just in your heart, but with your actions and the way that you speak and the way that you want to be treated. So I think as far as simplest steps to getting into mindfulness, or we could even drop the labels. I think labels sometimes are tough. To get into loving yourself, to get into evolving yourself, I think journaling is fantastic. There's many different kinds of journaling, different journaling types, but whatever you choose, I think it will help you develop that mentality that I think will serve you longer than you journal and when you're not journaling. So I'd say simple answer, journaling.
Oh, well, that's great. And why not talk about it now? Because I know you have a journal that's out there that has helped so many people. What is your approach? How do you guide people in your journal specifically? And what might be different in terms of how they're journaling when they're using your journal?
Yeah. I think anyone who creates a journal and is selling it is great. I don't think you could ever get your hands on a bad journal. for me, when I was, in 2018, I was like, I want to be a journaler because I would see like Tim Ferriss and like some of these guys talk about their journaling routine. So I went out and I would buy a bunch of journals, the top journals on Amazon, call it. And they basically fell into what I found were two categories. One was it made me more stressed to journal than to not journal because the journals were like more like productivity journals. It was like, all right, wake up, write down your goals, come back at lunch, audit yourself, and then come back at night and talk about how your day went and how you felt. I was like, man, I feel overwhelmed. Like it makes me feel bad that I'm not accomplishing these things, or it's just too much. It's too many prompts or whatever. The other type I found was like stream of consciousness journal. How you feeling? What's on your heart? And as a somewhat ADD type guy, I was like, I need a little structure. You give me a blank journal, it's gonna be filled with gibberish, or it's gonna remain blank. So give me a little push in the right direction. So all I did was I sat down and I created what I felt was a good hybrid journal between prompted and unprompted. Good, powerful, hard-hitting questions, namely the questions that I tended to avoid asking myself. And I wrote it down and I created that journal. And I've created a bunch of journals since that was in 2020. But, whether it's my journal or the New Mindset journal or, in someone else's journal, I think the thing we should be looking for are the questions in it, the hard-hitting, powerful questions, because it's easy to sit down and ask yourself every day, what is one thing I'm grateful for? Or what would make me happy today? And I think questions like that are kind of like calibrating questions are good, but it's also easy to lie to yourself. It's easy to be like, yeah, I'm thankful for my health, whatever, dude. It's another thing to really ask yourself a question that you have to look yourself in the mirror and answer and get real on. And those are the ones that can potentially change your life. So that's what I look for in a journal.
Oh, that's amazing. So we got journaling there. And is that something that you revisit several times a day? Is it a morning, evening type of routine for you?
No, it's a once a day whenever I can get to it. And that was the other thing. It's like, some people have great routines and I admire those people. I'm kind of a fly by the seat of my pants type fella. So not a morning guy, not a night guy either. So I don't really know where I fall on the spectrum, but I basically want the flexibility to do it when I feel in the right headspace. So, I think if you can find a routine where you feel vulnerable in the morning and you feel great at night or whatever it is, do it. But for me, it's a once a day touch point, and you try to do it every day. You try your best to do it every day, whenever you can.
And that's what I love about you, because I feel a lot of people that are attracted to the summit, busy professionals, celebrities, athletes, things like that, they're very type A as well. And they want routines that they could stick with. But, you go and you watch some other people, in their mindfulness space, and they're spending an hour of yoga here and this thing there. Just those people probably can't adopt that routine right away. And so what are some of the other things that you're doing throughout the day that you find to be helpful in your self-care practice?
Yeah, it's such a good point, because it's easy to do like performative wellness, right? Yoga, journaling, therapy, and I think they're all amazing. And it's only performative if you make it performative. But I think the key to receiving the benefit of any wellness practice, whether it's something structured or as simple as a walk on the beach, is you have to be in the right headspace. So I really think, our effort shouldn't necessarily be to uproot our life and add something to it every day. It should be to find a way to get ourselves in a headspace where we could slide into different wellness routines. Yeah. And for me, it always has been, and I think it always will be, but it's music. Music, something about music for me, and specifically dance music, progressive, melodic, deep house, even energizing tech house, even techno, grungy stuff. It puts me in this headspace where it just makes me feel vulnerable. Not necessarily good, not necessarily bad or anything like that. It just puts me in this headspace where I just feel. And I think a lot of people obviously have the same relationship with music. Music is the ultimate catalyst for any emotion, but I've always found that you put on the right song and it makes me feel vulnerable. And being vulnerable is a key to anything, whether you want to have a transformative moment or a moment of nostalgia or forgiveness or whatever you're trying to feel. I think that's essential. So I recommend music, as simple as that sounds.
I think you brought up a couple of important points there. Number one is that practice really gets you to be vulnerable and to feel. And it's, and I think that's so important to do, because some people will do these things, these routines, but, in their head still everything that's going on in their work or business or whatever that might be. And so that might be different for everybody. And so I think nailing it and saying how it puts you into this different state is key. Now, I'm very curious about, some of the work that you're doing with mindfulness and DJ and putting it together. One would not generally think of those two practices coming together when they think of mindfulness. How does that seem to have worked for you? And how did you put this together? Did you just realize that, man, certain types of music gets me in this state and there's got to be something there?
Kind of, yeah, essentially. I mean, the story of it is somewhat funny and spontaneous. I've always loved dance music. I always have. Growing up in Chicago, home of house, and just being a house guy, I love dance music. One day in, 2019, I was listening to a clip of my podcast to try to find something, and I also was listening to Spotify, and I was moving a million miles an hour, and I was tabbing too quick through everything, and for some reason, Spotify was playing, and the clip from my podcast was playing. And it was at this perfect moment in the interlude in the song, because most house music goes break, build, drop, break, build, drop, break, build, drop. And for some reason, or not for some reason, at this point when I was listening, it was in the build and I was talking, and then I stopped talking and then it dropped. I was like, well, that was really cool. I was like, we filled the build in this melodic song with a little piece of mindfulness. I was like, wow, it felt really good. And not only did the drop feel good, because who doesn't like a drop of a good house tune, but also like, I was like thinking about what I just said. So anyway, that was like the catalyst for me. I was like, this would be cool to combine the two. So basically from there, I just went off and, I DJ and produce a little, but I'm more of a fan of collaborating with artists. So I just started reaching out to labels, artists, DJs that I really respected, and was like, hey, let me bring a mindfulness element to some of your tracks. Let's put together a mix, and I'll come in the interludes and make it like an uplifting, mindful dance music type deal. And haven't really looked back since. I've worked with a lot of artists and DJs, and it's just really fun. It's just cool to bring mindfulness to life in a cool way.
That's pretty awesome. And do you have a album that's out, or can people get this on Spotify if they want to be able to check it out?
Yep. They're all on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. They're just within the podcast feed, New Mindset Who Dis. You'll find them. I've done some recent ones with Two Friends and Martin Garrix and Griffin and folks like that. And now I'm moving into doing some indie rock stuff as well. So just any music that has the ability to make you feel a certain way, I'm in it.
Okay. Now, you've done this for a little bit. Some people feel very guilty to give to themselves. I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. If you are, I just wanted to let you know, join our community. There's so many free resources and a great community of people that desire health, happiness, human potential, to have more in their life, more health, more energy. And when you have those two things together, you could create more happiness, more abundance, whether it be financial, romantic, all these things in your life. And if you're just starting out, you don't know where to go, just sign up for thrivestatestarter.com, because in there you're going to get a bundle of information that includes a longevity ebook, a longevity and performance resource guide, lecture notes that come from my keynotes at Google, at Fortune 500 companies, all the insights in that keynote in lecture slide form given to you. And then finally, breathwork. I share 3 powerful breathwork exercises to access calm, which really gives you clarity and peace during the day, to access energy if you need to wake up and really motivate yourself, and finally a breathwork routine that you could do every single morning so that you could be very intentional with how you create that day. You can find all this stuff delivered free to your inbox at thrivestatestarter.com. And our community is growing. If you want to be a part of a community of people that desire the Thrive State, that are really in Thrive State themselves, and help other people along with that, you could be a part of the community. You can get group coaching from me. We do breathwork sessions, meditation sessions, and you also get to drop in and participate in podcasts in the future. You could find more about the community at mythrivestate.com. That's mythrivestate.com. So check out those resources. You're not going to be disappointed. And please enjoy the remainder of this podcast. And whether it be the time, the journal, the time to do these things. And, I certainly have a lot of people in my life that feel that way, and they get upset that they don't have those times. But then they start resenting people for not, being able to carve that time for themselves. How would you say it is best to communicate our needs for self-care to other people?
I'd say it's a two-step process. I mean, I think we need to like really reinvent and challenge the purpose of relationships in life. Like, what are we even doing here? Like, what is the purpose of a relationship, a friendship, a romantic partnership, even a bit, I would say not really for business here, but, I think a lot of the time we look to relationships to save us or to become our thing or to help build a life that we want. And well, I think, of course, the right person in your life is going to add that element. It's our job, first and foremost, to create a life that we're proud of, to create happiness that is personal to us. And then we find someone else and they amplify it and we amplify theirs. But if we're coming to a relationship with no sense of self, no idea of what makes us happy, no incentive to build life on our own, we're going to end up in trouble where it does feel selfish within the confines of a relationship to focus on ourselves. So even before we get to that question, I think it's really paramount that we understand, the purpose of life is to experience life. And it's then to come across other people who amplify that for you, not give it to you, not give you purpose. It's to amplify that. And I talk a lot about dating and not necessarily within the scope here, but like, I think that's really, really, really important, because if we're not doing that, we're just waiting for someone to come along and give us the blueprint to life, which is not fair. It's our job to figure out that for ourselves. And then, second, along the lines of like, standing up for yourself, relative to other people and your standards and boundaries and everything. I mean, I really do think it comes back to what we talked about in the beginning. It's like a lot of times we feel selfish, or we telling ourselves we're being too picky or too needy. I don't think that's ever the case when you have past experiences that you could point to and say, here is why I'm saying this, because of this past experience. Like, this is my proof. This is my why. Because I think where we get in trouble a lot is in the day and age of social media. It's easy to sit there and be like, I deserve this, that, and the other. And it's like, well, maybe you do, but let's point to why. Let's come up with the why. And I think that you're never too needy if you're saying, hey, for instance, like, I really need good communication in a relationship because I've been in this situation where I didn't prioritize it and it was hurt. I've been in this situation where I was disappointed because it didn't happen. So I'd really respect that. And most importantly, I bring it to the table too. You can't ask for what you're not willing to give. And if you're willing to give it, you have past experiences that you could point to, you should never feel guilty or selfish. These are things that you've learned, you're standing up for, and most importantly, you're bringing them. It's reciprocity. Right. So that's how I would approach that. I don't think it's ever selfish.
One of the things that I just heard you and almost even felt you in your communication is that setting aside boundaries come from a place of vulnerability where you're just sharing yourself. And it doesn't have to come from something that is setting a boundary. No, don't ever do that to me, or like things like that, right? So can you talk a little bit more about kind of how we communicate those boundaries? Because I like what you're saying there. It's really kind of just sharing yourself from this place of vulnerability and not, reprimanding or demanding certain things in your life.
Yeah. The topic of boundaries is one I'm really hot on lately. I did an episode somewhat recently. Yeah, I think we've gotten the idea of boundaries kind of backwards. We think a lot about boundaries as being like, don't you cross this line. Like, this is the line. Don't you cross it. And of course, technically, that's what we're talking about. But a boundary is less about them and it's more about you. It's more about the promise you made yourself, where you say, if someone crosses that line, here's what I'll do. Not them. It's no longer about them. Here's my boundary. And it comes from this place and everything we just talked about. But a boundary is a promise you make yourself. It's not an ultimatum you give someone else. It's not a threat you give someone else. It's not a list of demands that you give someone else. It's a promise that you make yourself. And it's saying, I believe this because of X, Y, Z, and I've communicated it to my partner. And if it's broken repeatedly, or whatever your threshold is, then it's on me. It's not on them anymore. It's on me. I mean, that's why it's got to come from a vulnerable place, to your point, because it's a promise you're making yourself. There's no one else involved. And vulnerability is a one-on-one activity. It is not a team sport. So, I think re-understanding and reinventing and understanding that a boundary isn't just a list of demands. It's a promise you make yourself. It becomes much more personal, and it becomes less about other people, and it becomes more about you, and it becomes about the promises that you make yourself. So that's how I evaluate boundaries, and it really makes things simpler. It makes things a lot more simpler. You look at behavior, you evaluate behavior, you make sure you're holding yourself accountable, you're communicating. People can't read your mind, but if you've done all those things and someone is overstepping, now it's not about them anymore. It's about the promise you made yourself. So we have to make those promises to ourselves. So now we're going back to step one, where it's coming from, why, and then the mindful application of it.
That is so simple and eloquently broken down. And what it does allow for is a sense of empowerment and not victimhood, to the people around you. And it really comes down to you and really allows you to go, this is something that I can actually do for myself. And it doesn't matter how people act or react. This is just on me.
I like that. Yeah. Thanks for adding that. Yeah. Because I think to your point, a lot of the time, like we give away our power with boundaries. We're like, here's our boundaries, please, whatever, maybe. And then when they're broken, it's like that person did this and that person. It's like, no, it's me. And it's my ability to hold myself accountable and to celebrate, hey, I made this promise and I'm moving on or communicating or whatever it may be. So it makes it much more personal and more about yourself. I like that.
Yeah. Can you think of an incident where it was difficult for you recently to set a certain boundary for yourself?
Man. Yeah, I mean,
let's go back to maybe first time too, because I have to say right now that I still get a little bit nervous, speaking to certain people about how I feel. I'm better in doing so. And I realized in the past what I was doing was I was reacting from this thing that came up in me, this trigger, and I was reacting rather than just sharing how I feel. But it sort of kind of takes practice to be able to step into that vulnerability. And I wonder if you started to remember the first times you were, starting to set boundaries and if there was anything you remember that made that conversation easier.
Yeah, I don't know. I think for me, I don't know. I might feel like I'm living in la la land sometimes. Like people are very nice to me. The relationships I have in my life are, I have a tight knit circle. These are people that, I trust and we love each other. And there's very little stepping on each other's boundaries. So I think for me, in my world, I think it's more about communication and pushing myself to communicate, not necessarily when I've been wronged, but when I have something that I don't want to say. So I think for me, with my girlfriend, we live down here in Miami together. Like I've always been averse to communicating and, just classic being a dude. So I think for me, like that's been the closest application of this idea, of speaking up because XYZ and because forward facing XYZ. So I think I've gotten a lot better with that. And it feels really, really good to speak to intention, to ask the right questions so that there's no ambiguity. I'm really like, whether it's boundaries or standards or needs, I'm just at war with ambiguity. I'm at war with what I call sitting in the gray of life. That's where you feel a certain way, but you don't vocalize it. That's where you suspect someone you're close with feels a certain way, but you don't approach the conversation. That's where you have a goal, but you're afraid of starting it because you might look like a beginner again. Ambiguous, gray, passive, middle to your life. I'm really at war with that. And, the only way through that is to speak, is to act. And it comes with all the not so glamorous sides of that: rejection, awkwardness, tripping over yourself, looking silly, looking like a beginner, all these things. But really, it's the only way through. And that's become my incentive because I don't want to regret living in the gray. I don't want to be there at all. I don't want to have land there. I don't want to rent there. I don't want to do anything there. I want to move out. So that's been my incentive.
I think that's such a very important point there is I think, I can only speak for myself, but, as somebody who was never really taught how to best communicate and how to appropriately act, in an Asian family or in the medical setting or whatever it is, we're almost sort of trained not to speak about how we feel precisely. We would dampen it maybe a little bit so that it would land a little bit better rather than speak our truth and authenticity. And so do you find that has been the case for a lot of people in terms of really just being completely open, honest, and vulnerable of where it is, and so that we could actually be very precise with our communication and not be in this gray area?
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I repeat in any conversation I ever have is we have to find incentive to speak up, whether that's speaking a need or asking a question or asking for clarity or whatever it is. We have to find incentive. The incentive that I found is very clear. It's that anytime you speak up and it's coming from the place of utmost truth in the form of a statement or an answer, you get one of two things. You either get what you wanted, which is the response you wanted. Oh, yes, we're on the same page. I'm glad we're talking about this. Like, yes, this is amazing. I want to give you everything you're asking for. You get what you want. Or you get the opposite, but it's what you need. You get rejected. You're told that, I can't offer you that. I'm not able to give this to you. This is not what I'm looking for. But either way, anytime you ever speak up and it comes from a place of truth, you get what you want or you get what you need, both of which always serve you. One stings, but both of which always serve you. So now anytime, and my girlfriend is always joking about it because I won't shut up about it. It's like anytime I ever, need to ask for something or have an awkward conversation with, a business partner or something like that, it's case, get what you want or get what you need, get what you want, get what you need, get what you want, get what you need. Because no matter the result, you're getting what you want or you're getting what you need, and both elevate you. But by not, you're living in the gray, and that does not elevate you. So I really think mindfulness isn't always this, sit in silence, be spiritual thing. It's about brute force, get what you want, get what you need, run through a wall, do whatever you need to do to get to that state. And as, sensitive as that sounds, when we're talking about feelings and emotions, I think we need to apply a little bit of brute force to the incentive we have to speak up. Because no matter what, and one does sting, admittedly, you either get what you want or you get what you need.
I hope you enjoyed that excerpt from the Thrive State Summit on this week's episode of the Thrive State Podcast. If you want to listen to the full interview along with the full interviews of the 50 thought leaders, experts, and celebrities in the mental health, emotional wellness world, please register for free at thrivestatesummit.com. Again, if you find this podcast useful, please subscribe, please share this episode with your friends and family members, and do us a favor by leaving us 5-star wherever podcasts are heard. It will help the show grow. And finally, if you haven't already, get the free resources. I have a bundle of longevity as well as peak performance resources to give you, which includes ebooks, lecture notes, breathwork exercises. You can get them all at thrivestatestarter.com. Thank you again. Thanks for being a part of our community and our mission to really elevate human potential. And remember always, you are your best medicine.